War. War never changes.
Some kind of war junkie?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Welcome to the War 102 podcast, where we explore the doctrine, theory, philosophy, and history of warfare. I'm your guide, Paul Darling, and I want to share what I learned in nearly 30 years in uniform. So let's get to learning about the most influential activity in human history, war. Welcome to episode 4, The Principles of War. Today's episode was the first thing I had in mind when creating this podcast. It was supposed to be the first episode. But I realized that listing the U.S. military's principles of war, and there are others from different countries which are similar, wouldn't mean much if people didn't understand war, its levels, and some of Clausewitz's concepts we covered last week. West Point taught me that the principles of war my first year there, and it remains one of the most important things I ever learned. Useful at every level, from individual combat to grand strategy. Useful in life. With these principles established, we can move on from the foundational lectures and move on to the endless buffet of subjects war provides. So let's learn about moose, muss, and mouse, moss, and mom, use, SOS. All mnemonics used to remember the 9 principles of war. I will introduce each principle starting with their U.S. Army approved definitions. Principle 1. Mass. The effects of overwhelming combat power at the decisive place and time. Synchronizing all the elements of combat power where they will have decisive effect on an enemy force in a short period of time is to achieve mass. Massing effects, rather than concentrating forces, can enable numerically inferior forces to achieve decisive results while limiting exposure to enemy fire. Okay, sounds fancy, but you get the point. To bring back Clausewitz, the best strategy is always to be very strong, first in general and then at the decisive point. There is no higher and simpler law of strategy than that of keeping one's forces concentrated. So what is that decisive point? That is the enemy's center of gravity. At the Battle of Issus, where the Macedonian legend Alexander the Great defeated Darius III's Persian army, the Macedonians were heavily outnumbered. The clash of infantry was going poorly for the Macedonians, but Alexander, riding at the head of his companion cavalry, dove straight through the Persian forces and went after Darius himself. Darius fled the battlefield, abandoning his wife and mother, who were captured, and his forces disintegrated when Darius himself retreated. Let's call it like it was. Ran away. The center of gravity for the Persians was Darius himself. And Alexander didn't use the bulk of his forces against Darius, but he massed what he could at the critical point and won the battle. However, as Darius was not only the tactical center of gravity, but also the policy and strategic center of gravity, the war continued, and Darius fought on. Admittedly weakened. Had Darius stayed, fought, and lost, he would have lost not just the battle, but the war. This is why we had to talk about centers of gravity first, because you have to know where to mass the effects. Principle 2. Objective. Direct every military operation toward a clearly defined, decisive, and attainable objective. The ultimate military purpose of war is the destruction of the enemy's ability to fight and will to fight. Every leader must understand what their mission is and how it ties into the greater plan. In the Army, our orders tell the mission of our higher headquarters 2 levels up. Later we'll discuss what the levels are in the U.S. military, so we know why we are conducting the mission. An example could be that a tactical unit is responsible for seizing a bridge because follow-on forces need that key terrain to maintain the advance. So while ordinarily a tactical commander would pursue and destroy a broken enemy, in this example he would have to remain disciplined and let the enemy go and retain the bridge, his objective. Unless you're the president, you have a boss and have to do what they tell you. MacArthur fans take note. At Gettysburg, Lee complained that he was blind to what Meade, the commanding general of the Union forces, was doing. Stuart, his cavalry commander and responsible for scouting, was out raiding far beyond the enemy's forces. Now, in Stuart's defense, that's what he always did. As long as Lee fought in Virginia and in friendly territory, he had little need for Stuart's reconnaissance capability. But now the Army of Northern Virginia was in Pennsylvania, in Union territory. There were no friendly civilians to keep Lee informed of the enemy's movements. Lee was blind because Stuart forgot what his mission, his objective, was. Principle 3. Offensive. Seize, retain, and exploit the initiative. Offensive action is the most effective and decisive way to attain a clearly defined common objective. Offensive operations are the means by which a military force seizes and holds the initiative while maintaining freedom of action and achieving decisive results. And this is fundamentally true across all levels of war. This dedication to the offensive, which was foolishly the fundamental lesson of Napoleon, is the source of much confusion and even more death. That it quickly segues to initiative in the definition is good. Time and again in World War I and the American Civil War, forces attacked into prepared defenses and were just slaughtered. All for this confusing a principle of war with a commandment. The apex of tactical skill is to fight the enemy at the time and place of your choosing. So while attacking a prepared defense may allow you to set the time, the enemy has chosen the location. 1 out of 2 ain't bad, but it's not good enough. Many blamed Clausewitz for this, but this is because they didn't read all of it. For he said bluntly, defense is the stronger form of war. But as a principle, seizing the initiative and going on the offensive remains the most powerful means of winning a victory and depends not on the enemy's actions, but on yours alone. Seize the initiative, seize the day, but always do so on your terms. Principle 4. Economy of force. Employ all combat power available in the most effective way possible. Allocate minimum essential combat power to secondary efforts. Economy of force is the judicious employment and distribution of forces. No part of the force should ever be left without purpose. The allocation of available combat power to such tasks as limited attacks, defense, delays, deception, or even retrograde operations is measured in order to achieve mass elsewhere at the decisive point in time on the battlefield. That was a lot. So this is where there is a balance. Back to Alexander. The Macedonian infantry, despite being the bulk of his forces, was not the bulk of his combat power. Rather, that was the superior mobility, training, and elan, otherwise known as spirit, of his cavalry. So his infantry held in an economy of force, while the cavalry searched for, found, and destroyed the Persian center of gravity. A brilliant example of economy of force was the German army during World War II. Churchill's intent, and Churchill loved going through the Mediterranean, was to attack what he called the soft underbelly of the Axis, meaning Italy. However, the Italian Alps are not soft, and for every 10 soldiers the Allies dedicated to the Italian campaign, the Germans needed only 1. Allied forces never pushed all the way through Italy, and it remained a wasted effort on the Allies' part for a small fraction of German combat power. Of course, the Germans lost the war, but the principle remains. Principle 5. Maneuver. Place the enemy in a position of disadvantage through the flexible application of combat power. Maneuver is the movement of forces in relation to the enemy to gain positional advantage. Effective maneuver keeps the enemy off balance and protects the force. It is used to exploit successes, to preserve freedom of action, and to reduce vulnerability. It continually poses new problems for the enemy by rendering his actions ineffective, eventually leading to defeat. Maneuver and offensive go hand in hand, for those on defense are often fixed in place and can be outmaneuvered. This is not to say mobile defense is impossible. In fact, it's a specific tactic and operational concept. If you can retain your mobility while denying the enemy his, you can always strike where and when you want. It's a critical advantage. It's much of why IEDs were so effective in Iraq and Afghanistan. Maneuver failed in World War I because the defense literally stretched from the ocean to the Alps. The ability to maneuver around the defensive strength of the enemy was taken away at the tactical level. Hence Churchill's attempt at strategic maneuver and attack at an entirely different theater in Turkey. Regardless the tactical and operational failures at Gallipoli, the concept was sound: regain the freedom of maneuver. Gallipoli will, of course, be discussed later. Principle 6. Unity of command. For every objective, seek unity of command and unity of effort. At all levels of war, employment of military forces in a manner that masses combat power toward a common objective requires unity of command and unity of effort. Unity of command means that all the forces are under one responsible commander. It requires a single commander with the requisite authority to direct all forces in pursuit of a unified purpose. If ever a principle of war has been violated with regularity, it's this one. As the need to shore up political strength in modern conflicts often necessitates the development of multinational alliances, each member of the alliance will delegate authority, to varying degrees, to what is often called the supreme commander. Some allied forces will flat out refuse a military order because the commander of that foreign force must first obey his political leadership. But as a principle, it may be the most important. Multiple orders from different people in battle gets people killed. This again is a lesson from Napoleon, as the Allies often had these conflicts of command, while Napoleon had the unquestioned allegiance from his subordinate commanders. Principle 7. Security. Never permit the enemy to acquire unexpected advantage. Security enhances freedom of action by reducing vulnerability to hostile acts, influence, or surprise. Security results from the measures taken by a commander to protect his forces. Knowledge and understanding of enemy strategy, tactics, doctrine, and staff planning improve the detailed planning of adequate security measures. Okay, so this and the next principle, surprise, go hand in hand. Surprise the enemy while never being surprised yourself. This is where sneaky Sun Tzu had much to say. The whole secret lies in confusing the enemy so that he cannot fathom our real intent. There are probably 100 quotes from Sun Tzu on this subject, maybe more. But if we can secure against the enemy knowledge of our center of gravity, he can never mass against it. Principle 8. Surprise. Strike the enemy at a time or place or in a manner for which he is unprepared. Surprise can decisively shift the balance of combat power. By seeking surprise, forces can achieve success well out of proportion to the effort expended. Surprise can be in tempo, size of force, direction or location of main effort, and timing. Deception can aid the probability of achieving surprise. All right, back to Sun Tzu again. All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when we are able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must appear inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. And finally, let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt. You must admit, Sun Tzu does serve up some tasty bon mots. Operation Overlord in World War II is a classic example of operational surprise. The Germans assumed that the Allied invasion of France would come near Calais, the shortest distance between England and France. The bulk of Rommel's defenses were focused there. Rommel still had defenses stretched across the French coastline, but outside of Calais they were weaker. Rommel was employing an economy of force, providing a limited defense against what he perceived as a lesser threat. But Eisenhower and his staff accepted the harder operational and logistical challenge of invading Normandy, a far further distance, for the tactical advantage of surprising the Germans and facing a lesser threat. It worked. And finally, Principle 9. Simplicity. Prepare clear, uncomplicated plans and concise orders to ensure thorough understanding. Everything in war is very simple, but the simple thing is difficult. And to the uninitiated, military operations are not that complex. Simplicity contributes to successful operations. Simple plans and clear, concise orders minimize misunderstanding and confusion. There is a legend from Napoleon, which I am absolutely sure is simply myth, but I shared the tale time and again nonetheless. Whenever the great Corsican made a plan, he brought in a corporal, to whom he shared the entire plan of battle. After briefing the corporal, Napoleon asked him if he understood what they were doing. If the corporal understood it, the plan was fine. If the plan was confusing or unclear, then the plan was too complicated. It's a story so good it has to be false. But the principle is outstanding. The more complex the machine or plan, the more friction, back to Clausewitz. So simple plans are one of the best ways to mitigate and reduce friction in battle. Keep it simple, stupid. These are the American military principles. As I said at the beginning, different countries have similar ones, but each have their own touch which reflect their culture. So I invite you to do an internet search and share which principles you think should be added or removed. Check out some countries that are currently at war and see if you think they are following their principles. And let me know. And join me next week where we touch upon the law of war. Thanks for joining us today. If you liked what you heard, please like, subscribe, rate, and comment. Most importantly, share with your friends. Join the conversation at the War 102 subreddit. And check out the War 102 Buzzsprout website for links to more information and supporting videos. Send me an email at war102podcast@gmail.com. I look forward to your comments and hope you join us again next week. See you then.